the only successful way to lose weight long term is to feel less hungry. In other words, you can't do it just by willpower. Otherwise, we just do what we've been doing and continue to do, which is to dig our own graves with a knife and fork.
Are we heading toward a tech-dependent Frankenstein future where no one knows how to eat real food anymore? With the UK obesity crisis worsening, the medical establishment's answer is a daily weight loss pill. But does it actually fix the root of the problem? Welcome to the Wellness Report. I'm Matt Maynard. Today we're breaking down what this synthetic hormone is really doing to your brain and your microbiome. To do that, I'm joined by leading health advocate and author. He's the founder of Food for the Brain and of the Institute of Optimum Nutrition. It's Patrick Holford. Patrick, very warm welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Patrick, is this new pill a miracle or a massive mistake?
Well, we could call it a metabolic cheat. What I mean is that when you do all the right things, eat less sugar, more fiber, healthy fats, such as omega-3 and exercise, part of their benefit is to trigger a hormone, which is called GLP-1. Now, this class of drugs, in a way, cut to the chase. They promote GLP-1 and have certain immediate benefits. You crave less sugar and alcohol, but as with any drug, there are certain dangers, both short-term and long-term. And of course, if someone's offered a pill to lose weight or changing their habits of a lifetime, they're going to go for the pill. So one of the problems is it stops people actually thinking about what the true cause of their health issues or obesity is.
Indeed, and we're kind of going to come to a lot of the issues and problems that people face. One of those early issues that has been discovered, certainly with the jab so far, is the loss of vital muscle mass and not just fat. And so do you think that by making, in Wegovy's instance, and I'm sure this will be rolled out across many of the other brands, a daily pill, are we trapping millions of Brits in a permanent cycle of metabolic damage, do you think?
Well, focusing on muscle mass, it's a given. So these drugs with enough use over several months will cause the loss of muscle. And basically muscle needs energy. So it kind of eats calories, it eats sugar and fat and so on. So this is one of the reasons why when people get older, they often gain weight. They are not actually eating any more than they used to, but they've lost muscle. And the average person over 40 is losing half a pound of muscle mass a year anyway, and because we don't exercise. So this muscle loss is tremendously accelerated by this drug. And we've seen this, for example, in the face of celebrities like Sharon Osbourne. So the real issue is that if you go on the drug for a matter of months or a year or whatever, and then you come off it, you've got less muscle mass. So you've got less ability to burn sugar and fat. And therefore, even if you go back to eating what you were before, you will gain even more weight. And not surprisingly, already we're seeing to a relatively large extent that yes, you absolutely lose weight on these drugs. And yes, most people gain most of the weight they lost when they come off the drugs. The other big problem, by the way, is shutting down digestion and elimination. So constipation is a real adverse effect that affects, again, most people. And what hasn't been fully addressed is that in the long term, constipation is unquestionably a promoter of colorectal cancer. The point is that when you have, more system for longer, more putrefaction, you actually produce things that effectively act like carcinogens. This is definitely true from meat, and especially burnt meat, crispy meat, bacon, sausages, and all that sort of thing. And colorectal cancer is pretty much the leading cause of death already in the under 40s. And in addition, it's already established that this class of drugs interfere with thyroid function, increase thyroid cancer risk. But the point is, you're not going to see something like increased colorectal cancer, in the first year or 2 year or 3 year. I mean, generally, we look for about a 10-year phase to see if something increases cancer risk. A bit like smoking. You could smoke for 1, 2, 3 years, see no increase in lung cancer, but it's there. So we just don't know the extent to which this could be a problem. But I would be very concerned about being on these drugs long term. And that is also why not only do you need to do exercise that builds muscle if you are on these drugs, but you also definitely need to up your intake of fiber and soluble fiber. That's like in oats and chia seeds, for example, and lots of vegetables. So if you don't do these things and you are on the drugs, go back to what you were eating before, it's an absolute recipe for disaster.
I mean, these drugs literally hijack the brain's appetite control center. What are the long-term psychological and neurological consequences of artificially forcing your brain to switch off hunger every single day?
Well, there's sort of, good sides and bad sides, because the very fact that these drugs do this, they're kind of showing what would happen in somebody who was doing the right things. So I've worked with many people who ate way too much sugar, refined carbohydrates, and they lost their appetite control completely. So they just didn't have an off switch. While if you do the right things, you eat food, you feel full, and you stop. So in a way, the drug is showing you kind of how hunger should be. The problem is when you come off the drugs. Now, the only successful way to lose weight long term is to feel less hungry. In other words, you can't do it just by willpower. You lose weight if you feel less hungry. And the best scientific evidence for how to feel less hungry, which, by the way, everything I'm going to tell you promotes GLP-1, just like the drugs do, but do it naturally. One is to eat what's called a low GL diet. GL means glycemic load. So this not only means less carbohydrate, less load, for example, less sugar, but also eating slower releasing sugars, eating whole grain, not refined, not all the white stuff. That definitely promotes GLP-1 and weight loss. The second is to increase soluble fibers, and especially Japan's favorite fiber called glucomannan fiber, which you can literally buy and put a teaspoon in a glass of water before a meal, and it suppresses your appetite because it makes you feel fuller. And the third thing that definitely promotes GLP-1 is doing, let's say, 30 minutes of exercise a day, or 7,000 steps, or something like that. And I'm author of many books on GL, and just for those listening, you go, how do I do this thing? The GL Diet Cookbook is the most popular, explains the rules, lovely food, easy recipes, tried and tested, and it works. And doing these things leads to, on average, a stone weight loss a month, or 10 stone in 10 months if you've got that much to lose, and it is sustainable. And what people say is, I no longer crave, these other foods. I'm not hungry, so it's easy to do because I'm not hungry. So that sort of suppression of hunger definitely works, but you can't be on the drugs forever, and they do have adverse effects. So what's really important is to learn. And by the way, I'm not totally against the use of these drugs for someone who's really stuck in what we call diabesity, really stuck in a hole, sort of tremendously overweight, got metabolic syndrome, heart disease, diabetes, etc. I mean, they literally can be a lifesaver, and as a consequence, they're going to, in the short term, take the pressure off the NHS. And one of the real problems is that governments are only elected short term. So they favor quick wins. So they've looked at the maths and said, if we spend this much, it will save us this much. And in the short term, that is true. If, on the other hand, we had sort of long-term government, they will know there will be a bounce back. But, current government will say, not our problem, we may not win the next election. Now, to give you an example, I've just come back from China, where everyone is being encouraged to take 10,000 steps a day. And they nearly all have watches or phones that measure their steps. Now, in Norway, they also have a very, very good strategy, very down on sugar, and every food has a health mark if it fulfills certain requirements. So it's very simple. You go into the shop, and if it's got that health mark, you're encouraged to buy it. I was favoring a sugar tax, 20 years ago. So we until we actually encourage healthy eating, and really do it, get less sugar down, etc., we're going to be in this problem, and the drugs will only solve it, very, very short term. Otherwise, we just do what we've been doing and continue to do, which is to dig our own graves with a knife and fork.
And why do you think then that the motivation of people in this country would be different to those that you've visited there, as you mentioned, in China and elsewhere? What is it about this country that seems so intoxicated, and obviously in other Western countries like the US as well, so intoxicated by the lifestyle we lead with high sugar and with lots of obese people?
Well, I'll be a little controversial here, and I'll say that there's many things, but I'm going to mention two. And one is pharmaceutical influence. I mean, in the Scandinavian countries like Norway, just to give you a classic example, when we had the COVID crisis, the person who was appointed to chief medical officer, Sir Patrick Holford, was knighted for basically selling drugs. I think from GSK, GlaxoSmithKline. And, which of course brought revenue to the UK, so very good. Now, in Scandinavian countries, you cannot appoint your chief medical officer as somebody who's just totally in bed with the pharmaceutical industry. You just can't do it because there are vested interests. That's the point. And in China, interestingly, GSK went there with, I believe, over $1 billion bribe money to kind of bribe their way into the whole government medical system, and got busted and fined 2 billion yuan. So, but believe it or not, China is one of the major countries that is not in the pockets of the pharmaceutical industry. So you can bet your life there's a very, very big lobby in the Wegovy GLP-1 camp, encouraging government ministers to adopt an approach which will be in their profit. So that, I would say, is number one. But number two, and I'll use the example of China, you can get from Beijing to Shanghai, which is about 1,000 miles, in 3 hours and 3.5 hours right now. But they're going to improve it because they've got a magnetic train running on electricity, powered by solar, and they've got that up to 650 kilometers an hour. So they think they can cut that journey down to under 3 hours, and their intention is to eliminate all domestic flights because it's actually shorter by train, and just have fast trains. Now, we in the UK, we can't even get to Birmingham, 100 miles or 120 miles, I believe. Apparently, it's going to cost a further 10 billion and won't be delivered till 2040, and could be delivered sooner, apparently, if it were a little bit slower. And right now, on the projections, it will save half an hour. So there is something remarkably incompetent about our ability to make cultural changes. Now, of course, we sort of at one level like it. We believe we're free and we're a democracy, and etc. And we see that whenever there is a push like a sugar tax, which we do now have on sweetened drinks, the kickback is nanny state. You're telling us what to do. But we're in a situation right now where the big food, the bad food industry, are creating massive healthcare costs that are having to be picked up by the state. So a more interventional approach, which is what's happened in Norway, has happened in China, makes total sense, because otherwise the state is picking up, this massive healthcare bill.
Mm. You mentioned Big Pharma there, and companies making these drugs are now wealthier than entire nations. Do you think that they have any actual incentive to cure obesity? Or is their entire business model dependent on keeping the world sick and hooked on a daily prescription?
No, they're just understand that they're a company. They've got shareholders. The objective is to make money. That's the nature of the beast. I've often argued that if we could have a charitable drug company where the money goes, back in, it could be different. So, they're a company, they want to make money. There's no really good money in curing people because then you don't have to keep, taking the drug. So the best drug is something that kind of relieves symptoms for a while, and you either have to keep taking it. I'll give you a classic example, which most people don't realize. There are 3 million people in the UK addicted to antidepressants. And what I mean by addicted is very simply, if they try to come off, the withdrawal symptoms are so profound that they can't. That's what I mean by addicted. And I think it's like 1 in 6, 1 in 7 people, especially women, are on antidepressant drugs. So if you look at it from a marketing point of view, that's perfect. You know, you've got millions of people hooked on your drug that you sell, and in case you didn't realize it, you cannot patent something that exists in nature. So you cannot patent a nutrient like vitamin C or fiber because it exists, so it pre-exists. You can only patent something that's man-made. So you have to make something like Wegovy, and then you can get a patent. And if you've got a patent, then you've got a monopoly, and you can charge a lot of money for it. So a lot of these drugs, I mean, statins is a classic example. When statins were on patent, they cost a fortune. And very, very good marketing created a new disease called high cholesterol. You know, you'd be perfectly normal. I'm 68. I've just graduated as a paraglider pilot. My pulse, my blood pressure are exactly the same as they were as a teenager. I have no risk for heart disease. And I went to my doctor for some checkup. And he said, you know, your cholesterol is 5.6, which is meaningless, and you need to be on statins for the rest of your life. And I said, you know, can you tell me the numbers needed to treat NNT for a benefit? That's what you should know, because it's infinite. In other words, there is no benefit of me taking a statin as a healthy man with no cardiovascular risk at all, but it's profitable. So that's the kind of hijack that we've got, a very, very deep level. And that's why the NHS is the fastest growing failing business in Britain, because we treat people, you know, it's a bit like shutting the door after the horse has bolted. You know, we're treating people for diabetes, for heart disease, for obesity. But just to be clear, the single biggest cost to the nation is not diabetes, heart disease, obesity, or even cancer. The biggest cost is brain disorders. Brain health, mental health disorders, dementia, for example, already costs more than all of cancer and heart disease combined. And dementia, and this is where a lot of my work is now, and it's why I was in China, because they're adopting, I have a book called Alzheimer's Prevention is the Cure, and they're adopting the strategy in that book to prevent Alzheimer's in China, because they've got 320 million over 60, that's a lot of people. They expect by 2030 to have 24 million with dementia. It will cost them $1 trillion. So the mandate from above is we have to prevent Alzheimer's, dementia, which is almost completely preventable. And that's so until we have nutrition at the top of the medical agenda, and particularly brain health and nutrition, we are going to see what we've been seeing, you know, for the last 20 or 30 years, you know, more cancer, more heart disease, more diabetes, more obesity, more health problems, more NHS costs, bigger drug bills, etc., etc. And of course, you know, the truth is that, you know, we're all slightly to blame because, you know, people are lazy. If their doctor said, and I know some doctors who say, I can give you a pill or I can educate you and eat a low GL diet. You know, sometimes there are some supplements involved. You know, a lot of people say, just give me the pill. So, you know, we're taught nothing about our health and nutrition at school. You know, we learn maths and we learn, you know, various subjects, but we learn nothing about the body. So until there is actually a thorough intention to put nutrition, health, education right up there in the agenda all the way through, you know, nothing really is going to change, or rather it will change. We will get worse. We will not get better.
Patrick, is that the crux of it? Are people lazy, or is that just human nature, do you think?
Well, I've contemplated this very deeply. And really, I would say at a fundamental level, there are two drivers of disease, and one is ignorance and the other is addiction. So the ignorance is you just don't know. So, you know, if you've never been taught that sugar is bad for you, why you would eat it because it tastes nice. You know, so ignorance is a big issue, and that's why education is vital. It is available, so somebody who wishes to learn can. Nowadays, there are books, there's stuff on the internet. You can learn if you wish to. But the other is addiction. And the problem is that a food like sugar is actually addictive. So your very, very clever brain is telling you you want it. So you literally crave it. And I mean, you know, back in the 1980s, I actually proposed that it was sugar, not fat, that was making us fat. And at the time, I was literally laughed out of court. Now, we've only got 4 grams, that is less than a teaspoon of sugar in our bloodstream. And by the way, there are almost 100,000 miles of blood vessels, and we've got less than a teaspoon of glucose in our bloodstream. If you have a 2-liter bottle of cola, that's 53 teaspoons of sugar. So where does it all go? And the answer is the body scrambles and releases a hormone called insulin to take the sugar out of your bloodstream to your liver and put it into storage as fat. That's what happens, and then you get fatty liver disease, obesity, especially around the middle. So fat around the middle and craving sugar is a clear sign that you've overloaded a system massively. Then you get more and more insulin, and then you become resistant to the insulin, so it doesn't work. And then you're in a mess. And the GLP-1 agonists kind of might reset the clock and give you an experience of not feeling so hungry and not craving sugar and alcohol. But ultimately, what you've got to do is get off sugar and the white stuff, bread, rice, pasta, even potatoes. And as a general rule of thumb, we say no more than a quarter of your plate is carbs, so kind of less potatoes, less rice, less pasta, whole, don't refine it. Half the plate is vegetables, and the remaining quarter is protein. So it's really crazy it's really crazy to just hand out these drugs and hand out no education to go alongside it. That's the point. And what I'm learning in China, because I just came back and we taught 10 million people, and I'm going back in May next year, and their aspiration is to teach 100 million people, is in this digital age, it is entirely possible to educate and encourage behavior change. Entirely possible. So let me give you a simple example. If it were the case that to get a prescription for one of these drugs, you had to sign up to an online, digital health course that encouraged you how to eat the right things week by week, step by step, which is what I'm doing now in China with Alzheimer's, but also we're doing in the UK through our charity, foodforthebrain.org. So foodforthebrain.org, you go there, you take a test, it measures your cognitive function accurately. We've done 500,000 tests. We just got a grant to put it into the NHS. You then fill in a questionnaire which identifies your risk. It's all free. And then you start education to change the things that will reduce your risk. So the what 3 words that I really like are what causes that. So if you are overweight, and here's a drug that can help you lose weight, the question is, why am I overweight? And what do I have to do to not be overweight? I love food. I eat every meal to complete satiation. I don't stop because of, I'm trained to. I stop because I'm absolutely full. I've filled myself up with the good stuff. And when your nutrition is right, then you don't crave lots of alcohol, lots of sugar, and all that sort of thing. So it's entirely doable. And the drugs are a kind of short-term fix with long-term problems that we don't even know what all those long-term problems are. We know, for example, that there is a rare, but not so rare, blindness, caused by these drugs, irreversible blindness. So there are more and more cases of that coming out. So, drugs, short-term fix, change your behaviors, okay, could have benefit, but you've gotta then learn what it is that caused the problem in the first place in order to prevent it in the long term.
So let's assume then that we're on the path that we're on. If the country hands out daily weight loss pills, like candy to solve the UK obesity crisis, what does this country look like in 10 years, do you think? What will this country look like in 10 years? Because we assume that that people won't have this education on nutrition.
Yeah. Well, I mean, number one, the healthcare costs are going to go through the roof, and who pays for that? We think of the NHS as free. It's not. About 20% of our taxes are, going in that direction. So it's going to cost us, more and more, and that puts, a massive pressure on the entire economy. We've got that to deal with. we've got, I mean, I know in children, on the current rate of decline in mental health, we predict that half of all children will be neurodivergent by 2080. Rates of dementia will go up. Heart disease is relatively stable, actually. Diabetes continues to go up a lot. Obesity goes up. So we end up fat and sick, and our mind's not working so well, which is not often taken into consideration. Actual brain size has shrunk by 20% in the last 20,000 years. That's a whole interesting conversation. But I think that part of what's happening is not just poor physical health, but in a way, we're dumbing down. We're dumbing down. And then we don't have the intelligence to ask the right questions and create the right solutions, which are entirely possible. And probably the biggest block there, is the corruption of the whole pharma medical complex, unfortunately. But the good news is we live in a digital age where we have access to, channels such as yours, books, and all the rest of it. So we may have a world that slightly divides to those who get healthier and healthier and learn how to deal with things, and those who get sicker and sicker. And already historically, the rich people were always fat, and the poor people were thin. That's how it's been. And in some cultures, it's sort of Africa and India, to be overweight is a sign of wealth. And the rich could afford refined foods, and the poor couldn't because they're cheaper. You haven't had to process them. So that still exists in some cultures, such as Indian African cultures to some extent. And now we have a situation where actually the rich are thinner and the poor are fatter. So we really have a major issue with the junk food industry and the ultra-processed food industry. And you may have heard that the state of California is suing a number of food companies who the evidence is that they knowingly knew that how they manipulated food would create addiction to the food, and they knew that their foods were harmful. So they knowingly did that to make sales, and they're now being sued by the state of California. So I think we need to look very clearly at the issue of long-term consequences and what's really happening, with big food, big pharma, also big ag. I happen to live in the Black Mountains of Wales. We've got 20 acres. We grow all our own food in a sustainable way. We're trying to create a model for how one could live healthily. And there is a growing movement. I think we have to say there is a growing movement in all of these areas. So my maybe optimistic view is that more people are waking up, but not largely due to government agendas. I mean, I'll give you a classic example here, which is quite a shocker. A friend of mine who used to be Vice Dean of Oxford Medical School, this is some years ago, sat in on the lecture on diabetes. Now, training in medicine at Oxford is considered one of the best places. And at the end of the lecture, there was 7 minutes on nutrition. And the lecturer said, by the way, guys, that is the only nutrition you're getting in your medical training. So the reality is the doctors, young doctors, do not know about nutrition. They just don't, because they haven't been taught. But they get thousands and thousands of hours of pharmacology. So they're actually being taught, do you prescribe this GLP-1 or that GLP-1 or this or this or this? That's what they're being taught. Now, there's a lovely doctor, Dr. David Unwin, and he's reversed diabetes in hundreds and hundreds of his patients. And again, he does kind of what I'm advocating. And in fact, I helped to turn him onto this in the first place, a low glycemic load diet and the support of health coaching. So his patients are given a choice. He said, well, I can prescribe you these drugs for your diabetes, or I can help you sort out what caused it in the first place, and we'll solve it in the long term by eating a low glycemic load diet. And we've got a group in our practice, so you can come to sessions. It's a coaching group. You can learn how to do it. And the vast majority of people, when given that option, will actually go for the diet and the coaching. The usual answer of doctors, I don't have enough time, that's what they say, and my patients aren't interested, they just want a pill. And that's a bit of a lame excuse because it just means that they haven't really been very persuasive in encouraging an alternative option. So when I started the Institute for Optimum Nutrition in 1984, I wanted to create an army of nutritional therapists, and we now have many thousands across the land. It's a degree accredited course who could work with doctors. So every GP practice could very easily get a nutritional therapist to run a coaching group every week for their diabetic, obese, heart disease patients. And in my view, I would sort of set it up where the condition of receiving one of these drugs is, that you need to get involved in, in the coaching. And, it's all doable. It's absolutely doable. It's cost effective. But we need a health minister, so to speak, if you go right to the top, who is progressive and aggressive, because otherwise it's going to get worse and worse.
Patrick, I think that's all we've got time for. That was absolutely brilliant. So thank you so much.
My pleasure. Have a lovely weekend.